Okay, in this video, let me show you how to deploy and manage serverless apps using serverless framework to AWS Lambda. Now, three important terms you need to understand here: serverless apps, serverless framework, and AWS Lambda. Serverless applications are those cloud-based applications that do not require you to manage servers. Serverless framework is an open source framework that allows you to build and deploy serverless applications. And then AWS Lambda is a service from AWS that allows you to host your application in a serverless manner. And when I say that it allows you to host your application in a serverless manner, what I really mean by that, you simply create an application, you host it there, and then you do not have to worry about creating and setting up a server and then managing that server. The AWS Lambda is going to do that automatically for you. Okay, let's get started by installing serverless in your system. To do that, I'm going to be using npm command, and I'm going to execute npm install serverless, and I'm also going to pass -g, which basically means install this package as the global dependency. So as you can see, this has been installed. Now to verify if this is installed, what you can do, you can execute serverless -- version, and then this should give you the version of serverless framework that you are using. In this case, 4.6.2. You also have the shortcut command available, which you can write. Instead of serverless, you can simply write SLS, which basically means serverless, same thing. And then you can pass all of these other commands. So you can see this is also working as expected. Okay, now let's go to desktop. In this one, I'm going to create a new project using this SLS or serverless CLI tool, which we have just installed. To do that, I'm just going to execute SLS. So when you do that, you can see it is asking me what kind of template do you want to use. And here you can see you have a lot of templates available. For example, Node.js HTTP API, Node.js Express API, Python HTTP API, and so on. You get the idea. Now to keep things simple, I'm just going to go with this first option, Node.js and HTTP API. Now it is asking me to name my project. Let's call this SLS tutorial YouTube. I'm gonna hit enter. This is going to download the templates. And since I'm already logged in, it is asking me, do you want to create a new app or do you want to link an existing application to this project? Now here's the thing. You do not have to create an app or link to an existing app. This step is optional. But if you do create an app, it is going to store some of the information right inside of serverless framework dashboard. And it will also enable you to use additional features like observability, state, AWS access sharing, and so much more. Now for the purpose of this video, I don't care about this. So I'm simply gonna choose skip adding an app. Okay, now we just need to open this folder inside of the code editor. So I'm gonna open that. Now you can see that it only contains 4 files for now: gitignore, handler.js, readme.md, and then serverless.yaml file. Now if we take a look at this handler.js file, you'll see that we are exporting this hello function out of this file, and this is just returning an object that contains a status code and then body. Now think of it like this. Remember a few minutes ago we have created a template of Node.js and HTTP API. Now what that is going to do is when we deploy this Lambda function, it is going to give us access to an HTTP endpoint. We can use that endpoint to trigger this Lambda function. So think of it like this. So let's say this represents your Lambda function endpoint. Okay. Now what you can do, you can make a GET request to this endpoint, and you can also pass some data depending upon if you are making a GET or POST request. The event you're seeing over here is going to represent that request. So think of it like this. Whenever we make a request to the HTTP endpoint that we'll be getting, it is going to trigger this Lambda function that we are writing over here. Okay. And whatever response we return from here is going to be received by the client, whoever has made that request. Okay, that means in this handler.js file, what we are doing, we're just exporting this handler function and nothing else. Now let's come to the most important file that is present inside of this directory, which is serverless.yaml file. Now through this file, you basically describe how serverless framework should deploy your Lambda function within your AWS account. Now you'll notice a few things over here. First of all, you'll notice the organization name, and then you'll notice the service name. And here in the service name, you can see I have specified SLS tutorial YouTube. Now this is important because within your AWS account, you can have tons of services. So it is going to help you filter out logs based on a particular service. So that is why we are passing a service name over here. In the provider, we are choosing AWS. In the runtime, we can choose a different version of Node.js if you want. So let's say I'm going to go with Node.js version 22. .x means that I'm fine with any version of Node.js as long as it is Node.js version 22. And then in these functions, we are declaring our Lambda function. So what we have specified that we have a function named hello, and then this hello function basically references the hello functions that we are exporting out of the handler file. So if we just take a look at that file again, notice we have this handler.js file. If I click on this, we are exporting a function named hello out of this file. And then in the serverless.yaml file, we're simply referencing that function over here. Okay. And then we are setting up some of the events, like how do we want to trigger this particular Lambda function. And here we are specifying that it is going to be an HTTP API endpoint, and then it should be triggered just on the base URL that we'll be getting initially. And the method that we'll be using to trigger this endpoint is going to be get method. Okay, now let's deploy this Lambda function to our AWS account. To do that, I can open my terminal and I can simply say SLS and then deploy. When I do that, you'll see that it is authenticating. And then we are seeing this error that stack SLS tutorial YouTube dev failure to deploy. And the reason that this is giving us is that AWS credentials missing or invalid. And this actually makes sense when you think about it. We have not tell serverless framework in which account we want to deploy this AWS Lambda function. That means we should now go to aws.amazon.com, and here you need to create a new account. I already have an account, so I'm going to click on this sign into console. Now within your AWS account, you have a lot of services available, right? And there's just tons and tons of services available depending upon your requirements. For example, EC2, S3, IAM, AWS Lambda, and thousands of other services are available. Since we have just created our account, we are essentially the root user. That means we have all the permissions that is available to us for all the services. Now to deploy the AWS Lambda function, we are not going to use the credentials of the root user because it has a lot of the permission. We do not want to do that. So the first step is we need to come to the search bar and then we need to search for IAM. IAM basically stands for Identity and Access Management. So we need to click on this. Then in the sidebar, we need to click on the users. And then here at the top, we need to click on create user. I'm going to call this user SLS YouTube user. Then I'm going to click on next. And right now, I'm not adding any permission to this particular user. I'm just going to click on next. I'm going to click on create user. So now you can see that I have this user listed over here. I'm going to click on this. So now we need an access key. So I'm going to click on this create access key. Now this is asking me, where are you going to use this access key? Now the reason why this is asking you, so that it can recommend what is the best option for your use case. And since in our case, I'm just going to use those access keys to deploy AWS Lambda to my AWS account, I'm just going to go with this other option. Then I'm going to click on this next. You can provide a description if you want. I'm going to click on create access key. Now you can see that this is the access key that is available to me. I'm going to copy access key. I'm going to come here. I'm going to create a .env file. Within this file, I'm going to add this environment variable AWS access key _ID and make sure we pass this over here. We also need to pass the AWS access secret key. Let me get rid of all of these. Now I'm going to come here. I'm going to click on copy secret access key. And here I'm simply going to copy my access key. Now at this time, when I try to execute this command again, let's see what happens. Okay, so it looks like we are getting another error. Let's see what is going on. Okay, so now you can see that it is correctly detecting the user, SLS YouTube user, and it is telling us that this user is not authorized to perform cloud formation on resource this and this. This means essentially that this user does not have the permission to perform this cloud formation operation. Now, cloud formation is another service that serverless framework uses to basically manage and set up your entire AWS Lambda, other resources related to it. That means this user should have the permission to use AWS Cloud Formation. Now, the thing is that the cloud formation permission is not the only thing that we need to attach to this particular user, because serverless framework is going to need other kind of permissions also to successfully deploy our application. And just to show you what kind of bare minimum permission that we need to attach to this particular user, here it is. So we need cloud formation to basically create and manage AWS Lambda and all of the things related to it. And then we need this Lambda permission because we are going to be creating a Lambda function. We need this API gateway permission because we want to create an HTTP endpoint to trigger our Lambda. We also need these IAM related permission because we want to attach different kind of roles to different services so they can communicate with each other. And then we also need these logs permission so that different services can write logs and we can see if there's anything wrong with any of these services. Apart from these services, we also need S3 related permission. But in case of S3, I'm going to just give these permission to a bucket that I'm going to be creating in a little bit of time. So that means we need to attach all of these permission to our current user. To do that, what I'm going to be doing is I'm simply going to come here. I will go to these policies that you're seeing on the sidebar. I'm going to click on this and then I'm going to click on this create policy button. Here, I'm going to choose the JSON option over here and then I'm simply going to paste all of that over here. Now, do not worry, I'm going to provide all of these permission to you in a GitHub repository. Now, one thing to keep in mind that if you want, you can be even more restrictive based on what kind of permission specifically that is required for your serverless application. I do not have a lot of time regarding this. And for the purpose of this video, to clearly demonstrate how all of this works, this is absolutely fine. I'm going to be deleting this anyway. Alright, now before clicking on this next button and save this policy, let's actually come here and search for S3. Now S3 is a object storage service provided by AWS, and what that means, you can basically upload and hold different types of files in your S3 bucket, and then you can share and access these files with any of the services or your applications. Now in this one, I'm simply going to click on this create button. So I'm simply going to create a new bucket. This is just going to be a general purpose bucket. Now in the bucket name, you need to specify something that is unique, that is not available across all the region in the world. So I'm just going to say SLS YouTube tutorial. And then I'm just going to keep all of the default options. I'm going to click on create bucket. So now you can see that the bucket has been created. I'm going to click on this SLS YouTube tutorial. I will then go to properties and here you will find the Amazon resource name. We need to copy this resource name. Then I'm going to come to this create policy and here I'm simply going to add my bucket name over here. Perfect. Now we just need to save this. I'm going to name this serverless Lambda policy. And here also you can see all of the access that this will be giving to that particular user. I'm going to click on create policy. Now I'm going to go to the user section again. I'm going to choose my user. I'm going to click on this add permission button. I'm going to say add permissions and then I'm going to choose attach policies directly. Here I'm going to search for the policy that I have created, which is this serverless Lambda policy. I'm going to click on this and then next. I'm going to click on add permissions. So now you can see that the policy has been attached to this particular user. That means this user should now have all the necessary permission that will help us deploy and manage our AWS Lambda function. Specifically, this very simple Lambda function that we have created at this moment. Okay, let me try this command again. SLS deploy. We are authenticating. Now we are packaging things. Okay, so it looks like we got another error. And the reason for that is probably if I go to serverless.yaml file, within this provider section, we need to also specify our deployment bucket. That means the bucket that we have created. Okay, so the name of this bucket is going to be, I'm going to say SLS YouTube tutorial. Now we should be good to go. I'm going to execute that command again. We are packaging application. We are retrieving AWS Cloud Formation stack. Now this could take some time. And sometimes I've also experienced this issue where it gets stuck. So when that happens, you simply need to terminate this process and then execute SLS deploy again. Let me retry this. I'm gonna hit Ctrl C to exit this process and then I'm gonna execute SLS deploy again. Okay, it looks like something is not right. I'm going to terminate this process and then I'm going to execute this SLS deploy command. And I will also pass this verbose flag. This should give us more information in terms of what is happening in the background. Okay, so we are deploying SLS tutorial YouTube to stage dev. We're excluding development dependencies. Then we are uploading CloudFormation file to S3. And now you can see that we are creating all of these things. So create in progress. Okay, perfect. So now it looks like our AWS Lambda function has been deployed. The interesting thing is this endpoint. And you can see that we can now make a GET request to this particular endpoint. So I'm gonna copy this. I'm going to open my Chrome browser. And then I'm simply going to hit and GET request to this particular endpoint. And let's see what happens. Now, if you notice carefully, we are seeing this message. Go serverless version 4. Your function executed successfully. Let's see if this is the same message that we actually have added inside of our handler file. So let's go to handler.js and you can see it looks like we have exactly sent this message. Perfect. Okay, now let's talk about some of the very useful commands that you have to know when you are working with serverless framework. Now at this point our Lambda function has been deployed. But what if you change something over here? Let's say I add an console log that is going to log the event that we get from that request. And also I'm going to modify this message. This message has been changed. Now at this point, if I try to make a request to this particular endpoint, you'll see that we are just getting that same old message. So how do we push the changes that we have made over here to the Lambda function on the cloud? We can actually do SLS deploy again. So I'm going to do that again with verbose flag. And this is again going to do all that process. Except it is just not going to create those resources again. It is just going to push the changes that we have done. You can see update in progress. Okay, so now the new version of the Lambda function has been deployed. If I now come here and refresh this page, you'll see that we are now getting this latest information. But the thing is, we have also added this console log. Where do you think we are going to see this console log? Now to see the logs for our remote Lambda function, what we can do, we can say SLS logs, then -f that we are specifying a function. I'm going to pass my function name. In this case, it is going to be hello. You can see the function over here, right? And then I'm also going to pass this -t, which is going to tail the logs. So it is just keep on listening for the logs and it's just going to print all the logs right over here. Okay, so it looks like we need another permission if you want to stream logs over here. SLS YouTube user is not authorized to perform logs describe log streams on resource this and this. So for now what I'm going to be doing, I'm simply going to copy this. I will then come to my AWS account, go to IAM, then I'll go to my policies. I will search for serverless Lambda policy that I have created. I'm going to click on this. I'm going to click on this edit. And now in this one, I'm simply also going to add this permission of logs also, describe log streams. And right now it is enabled for all the resources. Now you should be restricting this to only the resources that you are using. But again, for the purpose of this video, this is absolutely fine. I'm going to click on next. I'm going to click on save changes. And now we should have that permission. Let me run this logs command again. Okay, so it looks like we need another permission, filter log events. So I'm going to quickly add that also. I'm going to rerun this command. And now you can see that we are listening for all of the logs. So now at this point, if I just come to my browser and make a request over here, we should be seeing all of the logs related to that Lambda execution right over here. Let's wait for a few seconds. Okay, now you can see. So you can see that this is the event information we were logging. This is the route key. These are the headers. This is the request context. And then in the end, you're also seeing some of the information related to your Lambda execution. Since these AWS Lambda functions are serverless functions, what that means that they are not long running servers. So what happens is whenever we make a request to the HTTP endpoint, server then starts at that time automatically, execute that function and then shut itself off. And you can see the metrics related to that execution. So for example, the duration was 3.65 millisecond, build duration is 4 millisecond, the memory size we used, and then the max memory used. Perfect. Now, one of the things that does not make sense is that after every single change, I need to deploy these changes and then see what is going on. When you are building things, there is a better way to speed things up. For example, one of the things I can do, instead of making a request to this particular endpoint, which is going to trigger our remote Lambda, cloud Lambda basically, what I can do, I can actually come to my terminal and I can do something like this. I can say SLS, invoke local, and then the name of the function, in this case hello. So now when I do that, so it is going to just simulate that, and it's just going to execute your Lambda function locally here, and it is just going to give you the information that you are looking for. For example, this is the response that you are getting. Body, this message has been changed, things like that. So at this point, if I just come here, I change this message, this has been changed again. At this point, if I execute that invoke local command again, it is just going to execute this local Lambda function that I have at this moment. And we should be seeing this message that this has been changed again, right? But if I make a request to this endpoint, we should be seeing that old message. So this is the command that you can use to speed up the development and quickly see how your Lambda function is going to be running in the cloud. Now, the last command I'm going to show you in this video is SLS remove. So this is going to remove all of the things and dependencies related with this particular serverless project from your AWS account. So when I hit enter, you can see that removing SLS tutorial YouTube from stage dev. So now it is going to remove that entire AWS CloudFormation stack and all of its dependencies also. Okay, service SLS tutorial YouTube has been successfully removed. Perfect. Now at this point, if you have this question like in what scenario does it make sense to use a Lambda function, I can give you some of the practical use cases. A few years ago, I had to build a feature in one of my projects that I was building for my client. So in that project, what user could do, user can record their video with the help of their browsers. Now the challenge was that people can use different kind of browsers. For example, somebody can use Chrome, somebody can use Safari, then somebody can use mobile version of these browsers. And depending upon what browser they are using to record their video, we were storing that video inside of the S3 bucket. And then we had to show and render these videos somewhere else. Now, the problem that we faced at that point is that since people were recording from different browsers and different devices, the videos that we were getting were in different formats. And that caused this big problem that a lot of these videos are not playable across a lot of these devices. So in order to fix that problem, we needed to convert that video into a format that should be playable across all the devices. So what I did, I simply created a Lambda function. This Lambda function was listening for any type of file that ends with a particular extension inside of my AWS S3 bucket. Whenever user uploads that file, I simply download that file from the S3 bucket to the AWS Lambda server, and then I converted that video to a format that is playable across all the devices. Specifically, I was targeting MP4 because it was a format that was playable across all the devices. That basically solved my problem. Now, the benefit of basically offloading this entire process of video conversion to a separate function, or you could think of like separate server in this case, is that my main server is actually free from these scenarios. So we have basically shifted a lot of load from our server to the Lambda function, right? That's it for this video. If you want more content on AWS related stuff, just let me know. I'm gonna create videos on that also. And by the way, I've also created this Discord group. So if you wanna join, you can join. If you do not wanna join, you do not have to join. Thank you for your support. Take care. I'll see you next time.